Welcome back to my interview with Skivjana Neza, a product manager at the New York Times. Here's part two. So, when you had that thought of what is wrong with me, and I'm sure a lot of job seekers
Yeah,
are feeling this way or have felt this way,
yeah,
what did you do in that moment? Did you just try harder, apply to more jobs?
yeah. So the frustration was pronounced because I had been trying hard to find a job.
Yeah.
Before I moved out to LA, I had reached out to recruiters at different agencies,
Mhm.
as well as recruiters at different companies that I was interested in applying to, like Netflix and Google.
Right.
uh, And so, I was hustling in the lead up to moving to LA. And then I was like, let me just take a leap of faith. I'm sure something will open up for me once I'm there. And I continued to meet with different people. I went to like a tech job fair in the city that I think is organized once a year. And tried to meet with different people, ended up getting an interview, at least one interview from that experience, just in speaking with different folks who are trying to hire people at the fair. Um, I think at that fair is where I found the guy who I ended up subletting the room in my apartment from.
Mhm.
So it ended up serving a couple of different
Right.
purposes. Um, but yeah, yeah, I think when you do try hard and when you do give it your all, and it feels like you're coming up against a wall, you're like, oh, what's wrong with this picture? And I
Right.
think, as you get older, and especially from that experience, what I came to realize is everything will happen in due time. If you try your best, if you put in the work, if you put in the hustle, like somewhere something will happen that ultimately benefits you. And what today might seem like a blocker or a dead end road, I think ultimately you'll realize in the bigger picture that that was just a way of rerouting into an opportunity that was meant for you. Um, I don't know what your philosophy is, but that's how I kind of internalized or made sense of
I mean,
that. So.
when you're in that position, that's really the only thing. I mean, you either stop applying or you
Yeah.
just keep applying in hopes that you get some sort of opportunity.
Yeah.
But how did you change your approach when you got to that point where you felt like you were just bashing your head against the wall? Did you change how you approach the job search? Did you
Um, yeah. I'm trying to think. I know that, so I was trying to kind of execute a multi-pronged approach of
right.
cold calling or cold messaging
Yeah.
people on LinkedIn, going to this job fair, reaching out to my network. I think at one point I was like, okay, I think I should reach out to folks who I know.
Right.
If they know of someone, um, I think up until that point in my career, I hadn't quite gotten used. I mean, it had been a long time since I'd even looked for a job, and
Right.
this was my first time looking for a job with an actual professional network beyond just internships and like
Right.
college entry level positions when I worked in college.
Right.
So I had somewhat of a network to work with, and so I kind of activated that network and reached out to people who I thought might be helpful. Um, yeah, I mean, my honestly, my approach, similar to my job search at the outset of my career, was just to cast a wide net, because I
Mhm.
was, I wasn't sure where the opportunity was going to come from or in what form or fashion, and so I just remember just trying to reach out to as many people as possible through these different avenues, and I think at the job fair that I attended was where I met one of the recruiters from Age of Learning, if I'm not mistaken. And then she and I got to talking. And I think she mentioned that they had this open position. I was interested, and that's how we got the ball rolling. So yeah, I mean, I know the job market is changing, and things are
Right.
definitely moving to the digital sphere more and more. But there's something to be said for the in-person, communication and the relationship building, that stuff I think is still really important. And there's a way to do that obviously in a virtual setup too,
Right.
but I really think it's important to build those relationships and build them even when you're not looking, well, I should say build them when you're not looking for a role so that you have those relationships ready when you are looking for one.
Right. And I can kind of relate to that because hiring is oftentimes an emotional decision because
Mhm.
you tend to hire people you trust and you like
Mhm.
because you might be working with that person or you
Yeah.
might have someone you know have to work with this person every day. So if this person doesn't come across as likable, doesn't matter how skilled they are, they're not going to be someone you would want to work with or you would want someone in your company to work with.
Yeah, I mean those soft skills, as they call them, I
Right.
still think, or I still think, are very important. And no matter what field you go into, I think you'll have to work with people to some degree.
Right.
It's important to have some level of um, skill in that area as well.
Speaking of soft skills, would you say that by applying to so many jobs and trying so many ways of applying, you
Mhm.
got better at storytelling and talking about your past experiences that brought out your voice?
Definitely,
I mean, that I would.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of going through these interviews,
Mhm.
whether or not you land the role, is it is a learning experience
Right.
because A, you get to hear what sorts of questions different people ask about a certain job or position. And B, like you said, you get to kind of hone your craft of storytelling and refine the way you tell the story of your career and maybe to some degree your life.
Right.
So, you get feedback, you see what works, what doesn't, what resonates, what doesn't, where something might be more effectively put another way, or where you might cut some stuff out.
Mhm.
Um, Definitely. I mean, this is an opportunity to kind of, um, you know, flex and build your muscle around the process of interviewing. That is a skill in and of itself. It's not, I don't think it's something that people find, or that many people find natural or easy. Like you have to practice at it. And it's nerve-wracking. You're trying to
Mhm.
find a job. Oftentimes people are trying to find a job when, they might not be in the most stable financial straits. And so all of that pressure definitely comes to a head when you're meeting with someone face to face who could hold the key to your next paycheck.
Right.
um Definitely think it's important to practice this stuff out and practice with other people, like, or talk to yourself, even though that sounds kind of lame, but like you can practice in a mirror, or practice with a friend or a loved one. It's important, and the interview itself is a form of practice, obviously.
Do you remember do you remember a story you told during this time that you felt was representative of your skills and experiences?
Yeah, so at that stage in the game, I was trying to um, encompass my career at ReadWorks
Right.
in a cohesive way. It
Yeah.
was a bit challenging because as I mentioned, started out working
Right.
on these various projects,
Mhm.
and continued to work on various projects. So I think part of the task, or objective of interviewing is, you know, uh, shaping, you know, your experience in a way that is digestible to the interviewer
Yeah.
and lets them see you in the role that they have
Right.
open. So I think it's important that you kind of help to connect those dots in a way that is as cohesive and seamless as possible, because they're what they're trying to get at is, how does that experience translate to what I need,
Right. Right.
And so trying to tell that story in a way that's engaging but clear, comprehensive but simple, takes, I think, some refining, some fine tuning. But yeah, I think that was something that I was pretty sensitive to when I was interviewing is, am I telling the right story about this pretty long career I had at ReadWorks? I mean,
Yeah.
relatively speaking,
Right.
I'd been there, I think 5, 6 years, and
Hmm.
I'd done a lot. And so it was a matter of like, okay, what can I say? What, and that's the other thing with like interviews is I think it's important to when you're in a job, forget the point of actually starting to look for a new job, but even when you're in a job, like taking stock of the work that you've done at
Hmm.
periodic points in that job. So if you wrapped up a critical program or project, or if you just shipped an amazing feature, whatever the case might be, I think it's important to take a step back and think about, okay, what worked, what didn't work, how did I contribute, what were the results, and kind of keep a log of that, because that will be really helpful input when you have to then go back and tell that story to someone else. You know,
Right.
day to day, it's hard to lose track.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
easy to
Absolutely.
lose track of the details. Like, who can
Right.
remember everything I did over the last 5, 6 years? I can barely remember what I did yesterday sometimes.
Right.
So I think having some sort of like career log or job log is helpful in telling that story, and even just assessing your own career along the way.
Right. Absolutely. Um, so you mentioned that you cold call people as well,
Mhm.
and this is just for my interest too. What? How did one of those cold calls go? And tell me about your most successful cold call and the least successful one.
Yeah. So I think technically none of them were cold calls per se because they were usually preceded by an email. I
Right.
would say to someone like, "Hey, I see that you work at XYZ. I
Right.
would love to learn more about your experience because I'm trying to, move into this space. Would you mind if we had a 10, 15-minute chat?"
Right.
And sometimes people said yes. Oftentimes people said no. And the folks that would say yes, that was my first time speaking with them.
Right.
So, um, that's what I meant by cold call. Maybe technically it's not a cold call. um, but yeah, I mean, I think, similar to an interview, it's important to help summarize your career in a way that's engaging and compelling and
Hmm.
um, is understandable to people who might not be working in that space. And so I remember I spoke with a woman at this talent agency, and at the end of our conversation, she said, "Wow, you're really good on the phone." She was like, "That's really important. I like that." And I was like, "Oh, thank you." She was like, "Let me check what I have in my database, in my inventory. I'm not sure if I have a fit just yet for
Right.
you, but I'll definitely keep you in mind." And I was like, "Thank you so much." And that's the other thing is like, it's not just a matter of like reaching out to new people, but it's also a matter of like checking in with the people that you've already
Right.
reached out to. Maybe there's been some activity, maybe it's been radio silent. But even just like a hey, how are you? Just
Right.
wanted to see if anything has opened up that I might be a good fit for. And I also think like, just a human to human level. For a lot of those people for a period of time, if I remember correctly, I would as part of the holiday season, wish them a happy holidays because at the end of the day, like, they either answered an email or answered a telephone call when I needed
Right.
someone. And so I think it's important to reach out to folks, not just when you need something from them, but also just to say, hey, how are you? Thank you so much. Hope you're well.
So, how did these early experiences prepare you for the interview process with the New York Times? How did,
Um, yeah, sorry, I cut you
yeah.
off.
Yeah. What was different about Skivjana then,
Oh,
and then Skivjana interviewing for the New York Times?
yeah. So I think by then I had kind of honed in on the story I wanted to tell.
Hmm.
Um, I also had recently moved back to New York and started a new role. So I was
Yeah.
comfortably in the early stages of this job that was quite pleasant and I enjoyed. This was another ed tech company called Brain Pop. They're known for a lot of their
Right.
educational videos that they produced for elementary and middle school kids. Um, and so I really didn't have the pressure of like having to find a job. I had applied to the Times role, I
Yeah.
think a few months prior. And then by the time they got back to me, I had already landed this job. But it was the Times. And so I was like, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least
Right.
explore. And so by that point, I was just pretty even keeled about the whole thing. I was like, I could, hopefully this goes well, but if it doesn't, it'll be fine. I have this current role that that I just started out on, and everyone's lovely, and so nothing's on fire.
Right.
Uh, and so honestly, it is somewhat of a hackneyed, phrase at this point, but it was kind of like a vibe shift, because I was like pretty calm, cool, and collected. Not that I was a
Yeah.
nervous wreck in other interviews per se, but I just felt like pretty sure of myself and my journey. And I had also kind of gained the wisdom of things will work out in due time. What's meant for you will come to you eventually, maybe not in the time frame that you wanted to, but ultimately things will work out in your favor again if you try hard, if you hustle, if you do the right thing by do right by people, do right by yourself. Um, and so uh, I was just in that headspace, and so
Right.
I think it was a pretty good set of interviews, and I ended up landing it.
So what was different was that you were just far more relaxed and
I was
probably
more relaxed.
more sure of where you fit
Yeah,
within the general industry. You already had those years of experience,
right.
so you knew you could talk about a couple of signature projects you worked on. You also had that storytelling element developed through the coffee chats you did. God.
Yep.
Uh, so that was part 2 of my interview with Skivjana. I hope you enjoyed it. Click here for part 3.